The Quiet Observer. The morning light of twin suns cast long shadows across Nova Haven's central plaza as Zora hurried toward the community garden. Her translucent skin shimmered with excitement, the telltale blue flush of Navarian enthusiasm spreading across her cheeks. At 16 cycles old, she was still considered young by both her species standards and those of the diverse alien races that populated the colonial outpost. Nova Haven was one of the few successful mixed-species settlements in the Orion Arm, a testament to cooperation across civilizations. Humans were a minority here, comprising less than 8% of the population, but their influence was disproportionate to their numbers. Their adaptability and resilience had helped them secure positions of respect, if not power, throughout the galaxy. Zora's destination stood at the far edge of the settlement, a modest dwelling surrounded by an impeccably maintained garden of both Earth flora and carefully adapted alien species. The home belonged to Dr. Thomas Reed, a human in his late 60s who had lived in Nova Haven for as long as anyone could remember. He was a fixture of the community, yet somehow always at its periphery, present but never prominent. "Good morning, Dr. Reed," Zora called out, spotting the elderly human kneeling beside a patch of bright orange flowers that resembled marigolds, but emitted a subtle glow in the shade. Thomas looked up, squinting against the morning light. His weathered face crinkled into a gentle smile. "Zora, right on time." He gestured toward a collection of gardening tools. "The Centaurian lilies need thinning. Think you're up for it." For the past 2 cycles, Zora had been apprenticing with Thomas, learning earth botany and helping maintain the garden that served as both his hobby and the source of many medicinal compounds used in the colony's medical center. The arrangement had begun as part of her education credits, but had evolved into something more meaningful, a friendship that bridged species, generations, and unspoken histories. As they worked, Thomas remained characteristically quiet, offering guidance only when necessary. He was never unkind, but there was a reserve to him that Zora had never managed to penetrate. The other colonists regarded him with respect. He was, after all, one of the settlement's primary medical consultants, but few sought his company beyond professional necessity. "Dr. Reed," Zora ventured as they paused for hydration. "The history module in my education pod covered the Proxima Rebellion today." She watched his face carefully. "They mentioned the human soldiers who turned the tide at New Gibraltar. Did you ever meet any of them?" Thomas's expression remained neutral, but Zora noticed his hands tighten almost imperceptibly around his water container. "History classes are fond of their heroes," he said after a moment. "Reality is rarely so dramatic. But the accounts say what the victors wished recorded." Thomas interrupted, his voice uncharacteristically sharp. He immediately softened. "I'm sorry, Zora. The Proxima Rebellion ended 30 years ago. Those who lived through it prefer to look forward." The conversation ended there, but Zora's curiosity only deepened. Thomas Reed was an enigma, a human who showed none of the brash confidence or adventurous spirit that characterized his species in historical accounts. He was methodical, reserved, and seemingly content with his quiet existence on the edge of the colony. That evening, as Zora was returning home, she noticed unusual activity at Thomas's dwelling. A sleek, unmarked transport had landed in the clearing beyond his garden, a rarity in itself, as most visitors to Nova Haven arrived through the central transit hub. The vessel bore no insignia, but its design was unmistakably military in origin. 3 figures emerged, all human, all bearing the rigid posture that spoke of military training. They entered Thomas's home without announcement, remaining inside for nearly 2 hours. When they departed, Thomas stood in his doorway, watching the vessel disappear into the night sky. Even from a distance, Zora could see that his usual composed demeanor had fractured, revealing something harder and more haunted beneath. The next day, Thomas did not appear in his garden, nor the day after. When Zora finally worked up the courage to knock on his door, she received no response. Concerned, she used the emergency access code he had given her for the greenhouse and entered through the back. The dwelling was silent but undisturbed. On the central table lay a single object, a medallion bearing an emblem she had seen only in historical archives, the insignia of the Human Defense Force's Elite Engineering Corps, the division responsible for humanity's most revolutionary technologies during their expansion era. Before she could examine it further, a notification chimed throughout the colony. The council was calling an emergency assembly. All residents were required to attend. The colony's grand hall filled quickly with anxious murmurs as Nova Haven's diverse population gathered. Governor Ceylon, a tall Regilian with the characteristic stern demeanor of their species, addressed the assembly with unsettling news. A series of unprecedented solar flares from both stars in their binary system threatened to overwhelm the colony's protective shields. Evacuation was being considered, but the logistics of moving 30,000 colonists before the anticipated peak of stellar activity seemed impossible. As projections of destruction filled the holographic displays above the assembly, Zara scanned the crowd, seeking Thomas's familiar figure. He was nowhere to be seen. The Technical Council estimates shield failure within 72 hours. Governor Ceylon continued, "We must begin priority evacuations immediately." A ripple of fear swept through the crowd. Nova Haven had been established for nearly 50 years. Most present had never known another home. Evacuation would mean not only displacement, but also the likely permanent dissolution of their unique multi-species community. As the assembly dispersed, conversations filled with panic and speculation, Zara made a decision. If Thomas wasn't at the assembly, perhaps he was at his home. And if he possessed knowledge that might help, knowledge connected to that mysterious medallion, she needed to find him. When she returned to Thomas's dwelling, it remained empty. But this time, with desperation spurring her actions, Zara noticed what she had overlooked before, a faint seam in the flooring of his study, barely visible beneath a meticulously placed rug. With trembling hands, she moved the covering, revealing a biometric scanner. Without thinking, she pressed her palm against it, expecting rejection. Instead, the floor panel slid away, revealing a descending staircase illuminated by soft blue light. Thomas had given her access, whether intentionally or through some oversight, she couldn't tell. Heart pounding, Zara descended into a space that shattered every assumption she had ever held about her quiet human mentor. The underground chamber extended far beyond the footprint of the modest dwelling above. It was a fully equipped laboratory and engineering workshop with technology that appeared decades more advanced than anything publicly available in Nova Haven. Holographic displays covered the walls, scrolling with calculations and schematics. At the center stood a three-dimensional projection of Nova Haven and its surrounding environment, including detailed representations of the binary star system and its current volatility. Thomas had been monitoring the solar threat long before the official announcement, but it was the far wall that truly stole Zora's breath. There, displayed in a simple case, hung a uniform bearing the insignia of the Human Defense Force's Engineering Corps, the same emblem as the medallion. Beside it, a holographic commendation hovering in perpetual display. To Major Thomas Reed, whose innovations during the Battle of New Gibraltar saved not only human lives, but those of our adversaries as well. For exemplifying humanity's highest ideals in our darkest hour, the Alliance awards its highest honor. The image accompanying the text showed a younger Thomas, his face less lined but bearing the same thoughtful eyes, accepting the award from a high-ranking official. In the background stood a massive device that Zara recognized from her history modules, the atmospheric rectifier, the revolutionary technology that had neutralized chemical weapons deployed during the Proxima Rebellion without harming organic life. The invention that had ended the war. The quiet gardener of Nova Haven was none other than Major Thomas Reed, one of humanity's greatest wartime engineers and inventors, a legend who had disappeared from public life shortly after the conflict's resolution. And now, as their colony faced destruction, he had vanished again. Zara stood frozen amidst the revelations of the hidden laboratory. The modest human who had taught her to nurture alien plants had once created technologies that changed the course of galactic history. The question remained, why had he hidden this part of himself? And more urgently, where was he now, when Nova Haven needed him most? As if in answer, a console at the edge of the laboratory pinged softly. A message appeared on its screen. Coordinates, a time, and 5 simple words. Bring whoever you trust most. The unfolding truth. Nova Haven descended into organized chaos as evacuation preparations accelerated. The colony's limited interstellar vessels could transport only 20% of the population before the predicted shield failure, creating impossible choices for the governing council. Priority was being given to children and medical cases, with a lottery system determining remaining allocations. Zara moved through the crowded streets, her mind racing. The coordinates from Thomas's laboratory pointed to an abandoned mining outpost 15 kilometers beyond the colony's perimeter, reachable only by ground transport since atmospheric conditions had already become too unstable for short-range flights. She had shown the message to no one, wrestling with indecision. Thomas had lived a life of deliberate anonymity. Exposing his secret felt like betrayal. Yet if he possessed knowledge or technology that might help their situation, keeping silent could condemn thousands. Zara. The voice cut through her thoughts. Nexon, her closest friend since childhood, navigated through the crowd toward her. The young Arcturian's normally iridescent scales had dulled with stress, a physiological response of his species to emotional distress. My family received evacuation assignment. Transport leaves tomorrow. His multifaceted eyes studied her. Your family. No assignment yet, Zora admitted. The unspoken reality hung between them. As Navarians with no special skills deemed critical to colonial survival, her family ranked low on the evacuation priority list. Nexon lowered his voice. There are rumors of independent ships offering transport. For a price. We couldn't afford it. Zara replied automatically, then hesitated. The weight of Thomas's message pressed against her conscience. Nexon, can you keep a secret? Something important, something that might help everyone. The mining outpost proved difficult to reach. Solar interference disrupted navigation systems, forcing them to abandon the community transport vehicle halfway and continue on foot across increasingly unstable terrain. By the time they reached the coordinates, both were exhausted and questioning their decision. The facility appeared abandoned, its entrance partially collapsed from years of neglect. Yet as they approached, subtle signs of recent activity became evident. Cleared pathways, newly installed security measures disguised as deterioration. This is madness, Nexen whispered. What could Dr. Reed possibly have hidden out here? Before Zara could respond, a section of what appeared to be solid rock slid aside, revealing a reinforced entrance. Thomas stood within, looking significantly different from the gentle gardener they knew. He wore a utilitarian jumpsuit bearing no insignia, but designed for technical work. His posture had changed, more upright, commanding, the stance of someone accustomed to authority. You brought Nexon. It wasn't a question. Thomas nodded as if confirming something to himself. Good. We need an Arcturian perspective. Come inside, both of you. The interior of the facility belied its dilapidated exterior. Thomas had converted the abandoned mine into a sophisticated laboratory that dwarfed even the hidden workspace beneath his home. Massive energy conduits lined the walls, feeding into equipment Zara couldn't begin to identify. A dozen holographic workstations displayed simulations of Nova Haven's shield systems, the binary star's activity, and what appeared to be alternative defense configurations. You're not just a doctor, Nexon stated flatly, his scales rippling with agitation. I am a doctor, Thomas replied, of applied physics and xenomechanical engineering. The medical knowledge came later, a necessity during the war. He gestured toward the central platform, where a detailed hologram of Nova Haven rotated slowly. I've been monitoring the stellar activity for months. The official predictions are optimistic. We have less than 48 hours before complete shield failure, not 72. You knew this was coming. Why didn't you warn anyone? Zora demanded, her earlier reverence for his hidden identity giving way to anger. Thomas's expression tightened. I tried. 3 months ago, I presented my findings to the council. They dismissed them as alarmist. The calculations of an elderly human whose understanding of our binary system was deemed limited. The bitterness in his voice revealed old wounds. Humanity's contributions to galactic science have always been viewed with skepticism since the Accords. The Technology Limitation Accords. Nexon breathed, understanding dawning. After the Proxima Rebellion, Thomas nodded grimly. The price of peace. Humanity traded our most advanced technological developments for assurances of security. No more weapons, no more revolutionary breakthroughs without oversight from the Galactic Consortium. His hand clenched into a fist. They claimed it was for balance, to prevent any single species from advancing too rapidly. In reality, they feared us, feared what humans could accomplish when pushed. He moved to a sealed chamber at the laboratory center, pressing his palm against its security panel. The doors slid open, revealing a device unlike anything Zora had ever seen. It resembled a massive crystal lattice suspended within a framework of metallic components, pulsing with energy that seemed to bend light around it. This is what I've been working on for the past 20 years, Thomas explained, his voice softer now, almost reverent. A comprehensive shield harmonizer. Technology developed from my work during the rebellion, but adapted for planetary protection rather than warfare. But the Accords, Nexon began. Forbid the development of unauthorized human technology, Thomas finished, which is why I've lived as I have, working in secret. This device could save Nova Haven, but deploying it would expose me as a violator of the Accords. The implications settled heavily upon them. Thomas Reed had sacrificed decades of recognition, living in self-imposed obscurity, to continue work that could potentially save lives, work forbidden by interspecies law. The visitors who came to your home, Zara realized. They were from Earth. Thomas nodded. Former colleagues. They came to warn me that the consortium's technology monitors had detected unusual energy signatures from this region. They suspected someone was developing prohibited technology. A grim smile touched his lips. They didn't expect it to be me. Most believe I died years ago. What will you do now? Nexon asked. What I must. Thomas straightened, suddenly every inch the legendary engineer from the historical records. The harmonizer can integrate with Nova Haven's existing shield infrastructure to create a protective barrier capable of withstanding the solar event. But I need help to deploy it without alerting consortium authorities prematurely. He turned to them both, his expression grave. I'm asking you to make a choice. Help me save Nova Haven in violation of the Accords, or respect interstellar law and accept the evacuation as planned. He paused, then added quietly, whatever you decide, you must understand the risk. The consortium doesn't look kindly on those who assist in prohibited technological development. Zara and Nexon exchanged glances. The choice before them was momentous. Aid a legendary human engineer in breaking interstellar law to potentially save their entire colony, or uphold the regulations that had maintained an uneasy peace between species for decades. I have to know, Zara said finally. Why hide who you are all these years? You could have been honored, respected. I was respected for the wrong reasons. Thomas interrupted, a shadow crossing his face. During the rebellion, I was celebrated for creating technologies that saved lives, yes, but also for weapons that took them. After the peace, I wanted something different. He gestured toward the magnificent device humming before them. This is my atonement, creating something that protects without harm. As they stood in the hidden laboratory, the ground beneath them trembled, a reminder of the increasing instability caused by the solar activity. Time was running short, and choices had to be made. Outside, Nova Haven continued its frantic evacuation preparations, unaware that their salvation might lie not in escape, but in the hands of a quiet human gardener who had lived among them unremarked for decades, a hero who had never stopped fighting to protect others, even when the greatest threat came not from external forces, but from the peace he had helped create. When legends rise, the journey back to Nova Haven proved far more treacherous than their outbound trek. Solar flares had intensified, creating electromagnetic disturbances that rendered communication devices useless and caused gravitational anomalies across the landscape. The colony's distant shield dome flickered visibly, pulses of failure that grew more frequent with each passing hour. Thomas led them through shortcuts and hidden passages that spoke of intimate knowledge gained through years of solitary exploration. He moved with purpose now, his earlier careful anonymity abandoned in the face of urgency. The transformation was remarkable. The unassuming gardener had become a commanding presence, his decisions swift and certain. Their makeshift convoy consisted of 3 heavy-duty transport vehicles, hastily repurposed from the mining facility. Each carried components of Thomas's shield harmonizer, disassembled for transport and disguised as standard mining equipment. If they were stopped by colonial security, the deception might hold, but only briefly. "The shield control center is our target," Thomas explained as they navigated the increasingly unstable terrain. "We'll need approximately 40 minutes to integrate the harmonizer with the existing systems. During that time, we'll be vulnerable to both detection by consortium monitors and interference from colonial authorities. The Council won't just allow us to modify critical infrastructure," Nexon pointed out, his scales shifting anxiously. "Which is why we need a distraction," Thomas replied. "Something significant enough to occupy security forces without causing actual harm." Zara had been quiet, processing everything she had learned about the man she thought she knew. Now she spoke up. "What about Professor Callan? She oversees environmental systems and has clearance for the SHIELD facility. She's always spoken highly of you, Dr. Reed." Thomas considered this. Lenara Callan. Yes, she might help, if she understands what's at stake. He made a swift decision. "We'll split up." Zara approached Professor Callan. "Explain enough to gain her cooperation, but not so much that she feels compelled to report us. Nexon, your knowledge of colony security protocols will be essential for our approach." As they reached the colony's perimeter, the full extent of Nova Haven's crisis became apparent. The evacuation had accelerated, with crowds gathering at transport terminals. Security forces struggled to maintain order as fear spread through the population. Overhead, the shield flickered with increasing frequency, brief gaps allowing bursts of harmful radiation to penetrate. Zara's mission proved unexpectedly simple. Professor Callan, a stern Tyrellian known for her devotion to Nova Haven, listened to Zara's abbreviated explanation with minimal interruption. When Zara finished, the professor's typical severity had deepened. "I've worked alongside Thomas Reed for 15 years, she said finally. "I always suspected he was more than he appeared." She tapped a complex sequence into her communication device. "You have 45 minutes before security rotations change. I'll handle the distractions." With Professor Callan's assistance securing access, Thomas and his improvised team reached the SHIELD control center just as the colony's emergency sirens began blaring. Throughout Nova Haven, environmental systems initiated unexplained diagnostic sequences, drawing security personnel away from their normal stations to address the apparent malfunctions. The SHIELD control center was a marvel of interspecies engineering, a collaboration between a dozen different civilizations, each contributing their unique technological perspective. Thomas moved through it with alarming familiarity, as if he had memorized its layout despite never having official access. "Here," he indicated, pointing to a secondary control matrix. "This is where we'll integrate the harmonizer." The existing shield was designed with fundamental limitations, artificial constraints imposed by the consortium to ensure no colony could develop truly independent defense capabilities. As they worked, Thomas revealed more of the truth he had hidden for decades. After the rebellion, the consortium feared human ingenuity above all else. Our species had advanced from planetary confinement to interstellar capacity in less than 3 centuries, a pace that terrified the established powers. The Accords weren't just about preventing weapons development. They were about controlling human innovation in all spheres. His hands moved with practiced efficiency across control interfaces, bypassing security measures with ease. They embedded observers in every mixed colony, restricted human participation in key scientific fields, and established technology monitors to detect unauthorized research, all while presenting it as a peacekeeping measure. Nexon, assisting with component assembly, looked troubled. But the historical accounts describe the Accords as a mutual agreement, beneficial to all species. Thomas's expression hardened. History is written by those in power. Humans agreed because the alternative was isolation or worse. We traded our potential for acceptance. The bitterness in his voice was tempered with resignation. Some of us chose different paths. As the integration neared completion, a new alarm sounded, distinct from the environmental alerts. Security had detected the unauthorized access to shield controls. Their time was running out. Final sequence initiating, Thomas announced, his focus unwavering despite the approaching threat. The harmonizer will synchronize with the existing shield matrix, reinforcing its structure while expanding its capacity. If my calculations are correct, the enhanced barrier will withstand even the peak solar activity. The doors to the control center slid open. Governor Ceylon entered, flanked by security officers, and, more ominously, 2 figures in the distinctive attire of consortium technology monitors. Their expressions registered shock upon seeing Thomas. Major Reed, one of them stated, recognition immediate. You're supposed to be dead. Disappointing you seems to be my specialty, Thomas replied without looking up from his work. Governor, your colony has approximately 26 minutes before complete shield failure. The evacuation will save perhaps 5,000. The choice before you is simple. Allow me to finish or maintain protocol while your people perish. Governor Ceylon's stern features betrayed conflict. You're violating the technology limitation accords. The penalties will fall solely on me, Thomas interrupted. I've lived with them hanging over my head for decades. Nothing changes today except the number of lives saved. The tension in the control center reached breaking point. The consortium monitors moved forward, intent on stopping the process, but found themselves blocked, not by Thomas or his young assistants, but by Professor Callan and several other senior colonial staff who had arrived silently and positioned themselves between the monitors and the controls. The people of Nova Haven did not agree to die for regulatory compliance, Professor Callan stated flatly. Her words carried the weight of someone who had made her decision long before entering the room. Governor Ceylon hesitated only a moment longer before making his choice. Complete your work, Dr. Reed. The consequences will be addressed afterward. He turned to the consortium representatives. I invoke Emergency Protocol 7 of the Colonial Charter. All external authority is suspended during imminent threat to colonial survival. The monitors protested, but their objections faded into irrelevance as Thomas completed the final integration sequence. Throughout the control center, displays flickered, then stabilized with new readings. The shield harmonizer came online, its energy signature rippling outward to merge with the colony's existing defenses. Outside, visible through the control center's observation dome, the shield surrounding Nova Haven transformed. Where it had been a transparent, occasionally flickering barrier, it now pulsed with a deep, resonant energy. Layers of protection building upon one another, strengthening with each cycle. The characteristic flickers ceased entirely. Shield integrity at 130% and rising, announced an automated system. Projected sustainability under current conditions. Indefinite. A stunned silence fell across the control room, broken only by the steady hum of the newly enhanced systems. Thomas stepped back from the controls, his expression a complex mixture of satisfaction and resignation. It's done, he said simply. The harmonizer will continue to adapt to the increasing solar activity. Nova Haven is safe. He turned to the consortium monitors, his demeanor shifting to formal dignity. "I surrender myself to consortium justice for violations of the Technology Limitation Accords. My collaborators acted under duress and false information." The next 24 hours unfolded with surprising speed. As predicted, the solar flares reached unprecedented intensity, battering the shields that now held firm around Nova Haven. Throughout the colony, evacuation orders were rescinded as the immediate threat receded. Thomas Reed was placed under house arrest pending a formal hearing. Though the circumstances, saving 30,000 lives, complicated the consortium's typical approach to technology violations, Zara found herself suddenly at the center of colony attention, one of the few who had known the truth about the quiet human gardener. The story spread rapidly. A legendary human engineer who had hidden among them for decades, continuing his work in secret despite the restrictions placed upon his species. 3 days after the shield transformation, Zara was permitted to visit Thomas at his dwelling. She found him in his garden, tending to his plants as if nothing had changed, though the security monitors positioned discreetly around the property told a different story. "I don't understand," she said as they sat among the flowering plants. "You saved everyone. Why are they still treating you as a criminal?" Thomas smiled gently. "Because I am one, by their definition. I developed technology forbidden to humanity. The fact that it saved lives doesn't change the law." "But it should," Zara insisted. "Laws that prevent people from helping others, from saving lives, are wrong." "Perhaps." Thomas looked out across his garden to where Nova Haven spread before them, vibrant and alive beneath its new protective shield. "But change comes slowly to galactic politics. What matters is that Nova Haven survived." He turned back to her, his expression serious. "And now you know the truth about humanity that the consortium has tried to suppress for generations." "What truth?" Zara asked. "That we never stopped innovating, never stopped pushing boundaries, even when they tried to contain us. Across the galaxy, there are others like me, humans living quiet lives while working on problems no one else will address, finding solutions no one else can imagine." His voice dropped lower. "We were never meant to be constrained, Zara. It's not in our nature. We explore, we create, we solve, not because we seek glory, but because we cannot do otherwise." In the weeks that followed, the repercussions of Thomas's actions reverberated beyond Nova Haven. The colony's survival against impossible odds became a galactic talking point. The shield harmonizer's existence challenged assumptions about technological development under the Accords. Questions arose about the necessity and fairness of restrictions placed specifically on human innovation. Thomas faced a consortium tribunal, but the proceedings took an unexpected turn when representatives from 17 different species, all residents of Nova Haven, presented testimony about the human who had lived quietly among them for decades, sharing his knowledge freely while concealing his greatest accomplishments. The tribunal's decision was unprecedented. While acknowledging the technical violation of the Accords, they granted an exception based on humanitarian necessity. Thomas Reed would remain under supervision, but his technology would be studied rather than dismantled, with the possibility of implementation in other vulnerable colonies. It was a small victory in a larger struggle, but it represented something significant. The beginning of a conversation about humanity's place in the galactic community, not as a threat to be contained, but as innovators whose contributions might be essential to collective survival. For Zara, the lesson was profound and personal. The quiet neighbor she had known all her life, the unassuming gardener who had taught her about earth plants and alien ecosystems, had never stopped being a hero. He had simply found a different, quieter way to save lives. As Nova Haven rebuilt and strengthened under its new protective shield, a subtle shift occurred in how its diverse population viewed their human neighbors. The quiet ones, the unassuming ones, the ones who worked without seeking recognition. These were now washed with new respect and speculation, because they had learned an essential truth. Sometimes, the greatest heroes are those who never claim the title, those who work in silence and shadow, not for glory or recognition, but because solving problems and saving lives is simply what humans do. Thomas Reed returned to his garden, to his quiet life at the edge of the colony. But now, when young Navarians and Arcturians and a dozen other species passed his dwelling, they no longer saw just an elderly human tending his plants. They saw possibility. They saw innovation. They saw humanity's enduring gift to the stars.